Hi everybody, this is Mrs. Marr, and we're going to talk a little bit about different surface techniques you can do using slip. This is Terra Cotta slip. I don't know if you can see this in here, but that is basically like the white slip we used. It's blended much more consistently. But it's a different kind of clay, probably has more iron in it to make it a little redder. It will get more orange when it fires, and we'll talk more about that in class. But I'm going to talk to you, we did coil, or you've probably seen a video at this point on how to coil a pot. And the beauty of that is that you can curve your walls in and out however you want to do that. We made flat walls, although you can do beautiful decorative coiling as well. We made our walls flat so that we could try some different surface techniques. So in this one, I covered the entire thing with the terracotta slip and just painted it. I am going to see if this fits in here and just show you how you can paint onto the surface with the terracotta slip. So in this one, maybe I'm going to do some lines, and this is very wet. It can be a little drier than this, but you don't want it sticky. But I could create a line at the bottom. I didn't really finish this pot up very well, so we're just winging it here. But so you can control it a little bit. The drippier it is, the harder it is to control, particularly on a vertical surface. But I might do another one up here, and I could use another brush and with more control, a pointed brush, and actually paint details on the surface if I wanted to. Okay? So that's one way that you can work. And you might want to put a second coat on depending on, like there are spots here that are not that hard. But I'm working on the wet clay. Okay, it can be leather hard. It could probably be bone dry even, although I don't like working bone dry. It's powdery when you carve into it bone dry. So it's doable, but I like it leather hard. You get enough control over it and it's a little smoother, but the clay kind of, you get little stubbles as opposed to dust when you carve into it. But so at any rate, if your clay is too thick, it's going to drip. So be careful of that. I could use a smaller brush and do more details. And I can carve big general areas if I want, and then carve into them. So for instance, I could, I don't know, maybe carve, or maybe paint on a lizard. Okay, so maybe I'm going to do this so that you could see it, but that I can see it too. So maybe that's going to be his tail. I would probably go in and give this 2 coats. I didn't plan this, so I don't have a lot of choices in brush. Now, you want to be careful what brushes you use too. We really shouldn't be using the brushes that we use for glaze on with the slip, but I was being lazy. You could do a snake. You could do anything, butterflies, whatever. And you can put on as much detail as you want depending on the size brush and the point you have on it. So then I can go back and do Sgriffito on this. We're gonna say that's a lizard. I could give him little feet. I give him a skinny enough brush. If I have a skinny enough brush, I'd give him more detail. But we can go back later and carve in and give him scales or do all sorts of other stuff once this is set up a little bit and drier. Okay, so that's one possibility. Okay, another possibility is called Sgriffito, and that is when you take a solid area of clay like this one and you carve into the surface. So we'll put that aside for a while. Maybe it'll set up while this video's going on. And then you can carve into the surface. And there are a lot of tools you could use for that. And they don't all have to be ceramic tools. I could actually take the tip of a brush. Okay, it's got a kind of wedge shape to it. I could take a pencil, depending on the line I want. And I can draw through it. And what happens is, now that's a very thin line, but the clay underneath, if you look at this, I just painted the surface with the terracotta. So if I paint down to the white clay underneath, I can get whatever thickness line I want to get. Okay, maybe I want to create some waves. Now, the thing about working wet is you get those little stubbles on there, which you can brush off when it's drier. By using the brush, I can go thin and then get thick if I want to, so I can control the thickness of my line. And so on. You would want to, depending on what you're doing, you would maybe map out ahead of time very lightly, or use a stencil, and we'll talk about that coming up, so that your waves are all the same, or, you know, create a scene that things are very different. Okay? But that's Sgriffito, and you can do it different sizes. You can use different tools to create it. We're going to talk about symbolism in Native American art coming up, so you may want to incorporate that into this pot. And these can be bigger. The pots themselves, we talked about this in the other video, can be bigger and smaller depending on what you're going to use it for. Okay. There are other tools. You can use a tiny little loop tool. You could use a pencil. You can create a surface pattern like this. Now, I'm not sure if we just push in with the pencil, if you're going to be able to see the white in this case. But it is another surface pattern that you could use. It doesn't really involve the slip, except if you could see through it. I don't know what I did with my little loop tool. But that will basically scoop away. It's a tiny version of something like that, where you can use it to scoop out a line. And you can use a bigger one to make a bigger line. But we do have some that are much smaller. Okay? So that's Sgriffito when you're carving through the surface, when you're scratching the surface and there's a different color underneath. Now, because we're using clay, we're doing this before we ever put it in the kiln. Okay? You could do this with an undercoat or an underglaze. You could do this with an engobe, which we do have some of, and we'll talk more about that, which is more slip-based or clay-based. But this happens, these color changes are happening before it's ever fired. That's important to know. Because this is clay. You can't bisque fire it and then expect it to just stick right on top of the bisqued clay. Okay, so keep that in mind. When this is bone dry, you can dust those off and take it from there. So that's Sgriffito. And you can get more detail. Now, like I did the lizard, this one was a bird, The flowers, this was one big terracotta shape, and then it was carved away to create the highlights and the shadows and the flowers and the bird. Okay? So that's a combination of sort of slip trailing or just painting it on and scratching it off to create a design. Okay? Another example of using a brush to paint this on was this one, where it's actually terracotta clay with white slip on it and a white undercoat. I'm sorry, a black undercoat. So this white was slip that was put on before it was ever fired, and the black was an undercoat which also went on before it was ever fired. And then after it was bisque fired, we put on a clear glaze. Alrighty. Other techniques you could use. Let's see. You could do a stencil using the slip, or any of the things I just mentioned. And this could be set up a little bit more. This is just an index card that I drew an outline of a dragonfly on. The thicker your clay is, the less likely it is to seep underneath. But the beauty of this is that it's very forgiving, and even if it did seep underneath, we can just trim it away. Okay? But that's just an index card with a dragonfly on it, covered with packing tape, and then I used an X-Acto knife to cut the shape out. Okay? It did leak a little bit, but you can go in there and just sort of carve it away. Or even probably with a paintbrush and brush it away. And fine tune. So once that sets up a little bit, then we can go in and carve details. Okay? So that's another way you can stencil something on. That's nice if you're going to do the same thing all the way around the pot. Maybe you're going to make a big, oh actually here's one that has that stencil on it. Okay? So it was stenciled on there, and then the little holes, the detail work, the lacy part was carved out of it. Okay? You could put that on several times all over the same pot. Okay, this is Sgriffito. This is just a tool that we made that we pressed into the surface to get that shape. Okay, it's a stamp. I don't have any stamps here, but you can definitely incorporate that as well. Okay, and another coil pot. So they can be as big or as small as you want them to be. And there's a stencil. You can do inlay. So you could carve something into the surface fill it with the terracotta stencil, terracotta slip, right up to the surface. You can cover even over it. There's two ways you could do that. I'll show you the first way. You have little containers. You can slip trail as well. Maybe we can do them both on the same one. Now this is very wet, so I'm not sure it's dry enough to slip trail with. We shall see. First I need to get the cap on nice and tight. Snap it into place. But we could fill that, and if it comes out, we can just sand it back when it's bone dry. Okay, so that's inlaid. It's actually indented and then filled with a different color glaze. Slip trailing would be on the surface. If your clay was a little thicker, it would hold up a little better. This is a little wet for slip trailing. Okay, but you can do dots, you can do lines, and it will raise the surface if the slip trailing is thick enough. Okay, if the slip itself is thick enough. And we have different size containers in there that you can do this with, or you can bring something in from home if you wanted to. Okay, so the ones that we did right on the surface of the clay, we can't sand those away. They will literally sand away. But this one, if we sand along the surface where we dug it in, you'll still see it there, because when you get it nice and flat, this is indented, so that's called inlay. Okay? So, we talked about slip trailing, we talked about inlay, we talked about stenciling, and we talked about Sgriffito. Those are all possibilities that you can use. There's a million different tools. Use your imagination with the tools. And that should do it. Okay? You can go back in here and create patterns now if we wanted. Now that this is set up a little bit, you can do a combination of painting down the slip and using the Sgriffito to create more detail work. Alrighty. So, you should use any one or a combination of these on your coil pot that you're making with the solid wall. And if you have any questions, check Google Classroom or ask me in class or email me. Have a great day.